Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring the philosophy behind sacred anatomy. My guest is Desda Zuckerman, the author of Your Sacred Anatomy, A User's Guide to the Human Energy System. This is my third interview with Desda. The previous two interviews describe many details of her very intricate system of sacred anatomy. Today we'll be focusing on the philosophical principles that underlie that system. And now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Desda. It's a real pleasure to be with you again for our third interview.
I'm ecstatic to be back, of course, and I've been thrilled by the wonderful response that your audience has given me, and most especially that you have. And it's exciting, really thrilling for me after 45 years, 50 years almost of research and questing, to be interviewed by someone like you. And I'm so happy to be here, honey. So happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to be with you too. And, for people who are viewing maybe and seeing you for the first time, I would encourage them to take a look at the two earlier interviews we did where we go over some of the details of what you describe as sacred anatomy. And today I thought we'd focus on the operating principles. Now that we've talked about the structure, let's talk about how it actually operates.
Well, that sounds great. I'm excited to share these principles. There's 11 principles that I've developed so far, and I need to say that this is a living work. So it's not in cement, it's not in a box, it's not contained or controlled in that way, because the human energy structure is as complex and as amazing as the physicality. The physical body has thousands of little intricacies. Well, so does the sacred anatomy. And it's been years and years and years of looking at it, enough to just get the basic 7 systems and to start to understand the anatomy in the systems. And in the course of really doing that, Jeffrey, what I discovered was that there were underlying principles. And it wasn't like they came first and then I discovered the anatomy. No, the anatomy was something that took me years to build and to understand and to research and to test. But the principles evolved over time, and slowly I added to them, and they've actually kind of stabilized now. The basic operating principles of sacred anatomy, energy medicine could also in some ways be called the principles of subtle anatomy or subtle energy, because subtle anatomy and subtle energy really are the same. So the same principles you would use to interact with the subtle energy in the universe, you would use to interact with the subtle energy of the sacred anatomy. And so when I discuss these 11 principles that have evolved, really, as I've said, I think it's important to begin with the concept of energy is intelligence. And that's really the first principle. And I don't mean intelligent. I mean intelligence. In that all energy has this raw potential, this intelligence, and it has its own sensibility. All different forms of energy do. When we look at what we know about electromagnetic energy, we can say that it has its own kind of intelligence. It makes choices to be a certain way. And the same can be said for gravity. gravity makes choices to manifest in certain ways. Then there's also strong force and weak force, which, as much as I know about those things, they do indeed have the same sort of driving intelligence, an innate intelligence that's special to each of them. So if you look at the idea that energy is intelligence, it changes everything fundamentally. And that's what I was looking for. That was the thing that made it a principle for me, was that energy is intelligence is actually a way of understanding that which is happening around us.
To use a different metaphor, for example, in physics there's something known as the principle of least action. It would apply, say, to a photon, and it's as if the photon knows in advance how to get to wherever it needs to go using the fewest amount of steps or alterations in its movement. It's different than, let's say, water flowing downhill, which will take the path of least resistance, because the path of least resistance could end up being the path that requires the most action. But light seems to follow a different path altogether, as if it knows in advance where it's going.
Well, yes, and some of the most recent research is showing light has this natural intelligence and ability to form itself, to shape itself according to that which it is interacting with. So there's a quality of wonderful intelligence in relationship to light, and yet and I also think there's different forms of light, So the subtle energy that I'm proposing as a fifth quantum energy, yes, I have the audacity to say that, excuse me, but the fifth quantum energy would be subtle energy, and that really could be labeled consciousness. So in some ways, when we talk about subtle energy, when we talk about sacred anatomy, and when we talk about universal consciousness, we're really talking about the same thing. So what's fascinating to me, and has been all along, is that the sacred anatomy represents an organized, conscious, interactive light that human beings have around them and that they relate to each other with. And it isn't just human beings, it's also plants and trees and earthworms and planets. I'll never forget looking at the big comet that we had a few years back. Was it Hale-Bopp that came through? And I was lucky enough to be in the desert, in Anza Borrego Desert, with a guy who was a wonderful astronomer from San Diego State, and he had his big telescope up, and we looked through it, and I looked at Hale-Bopp comet, and I saw also planetary bodies with huge structures around them. So Hale-Bopp had a structure, but it was more like an electromagnetic energetic structure. But when I looked, I think it was Venus that was up at that time too. I looked at her, and there she is with the full energetic structure. So when I look at pictures, I can see these energy structures in photographs. So when I've looked at pictures taken from the moon back at the Earth, then I have seen the energy structure of the Earth. So energy is intelligence is an idea that crosses the cosmos, really. It includes everything that is in all creation. And I think that makes it a definite principle for interaction with conscious, intelligent light.
My physical body has, to shift the direction a little bit, rhythms. I have a rhythm of the breath, a rhythm of the heartbeat, digestive rhythms, and so on. Are there rhythms like that in the subtle anatomy?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I just scratched the surface of chakras in our last conversation. I mean, chakras are incredibly complex, and they can be equated in some loose way to a cardiovascular system, which of course is a pulse. And what happens with the 13 chakras is that they pulse together. So they actually have a toroid contraction and then expansion that happens as the energy crosses the core. So it is pulsing. That is pulsing. Every single system has its own pulse and sound, actually, a tone. There are 9 tones, and tones are a pulse or frequency wave. And so that's what we're experiencing as well. As I continue to look at the different systems, what I find is, like, for example, in the layers system, there are 8 layers, and each layer has its own kind of pulsing. Now, where is this pulsing coming from is the thing that drives me. Because, I can sense it, I can feel it, but why is it happening? And for me, the wrestling match has been with, how do I see into it, feel into it, and know into it with enough clarity to be able to truly understand the pulse of the different layers, the pulse of the different chakras, the pulse of the nervous system of the sacred anatomy called the template, the pulse of the electromagnetic field, because of course it has pulses. So everything is pulsing, much like acupuncture pulses and meridians. So there are lots and lots and lots of pulses, but there is a major pulse that you could think of as the pulse of the system, which would be the blended energy system or the chakra system pulses there. But each one of these systems has pulses. There's probably something like 200 or 300 different pulses, at least, that I've managed to track.
From our earlier discussion, you pointed out that the energy structure contains not just information from this lifetime, but from all the previous lifetimes as well. So some of those pulses extend back eons in time.
Well, we have a whole layer called the etheric layer that's, it's like your own little mini Akashic record, and it is a place where your soul's history is contained. Now, I use that term Akashic record because it's in the common vernacular, but I actually look at it as the library, the historical records keeper for each individual. And we keep kind of records of lifetimes, not just deaths and births, but all the details and the interactions of every lifetime. So when people learn to do Akashic reading from me, that's what I call etheric reading, is we read those records. And that's an interesting phenomenon. I could pretty much teach anybody to do that because it's just very straightforward. But it's because the information is there. And I guess you're right. The pulses of information, the pulses of lifetimes move through. But it's important to understand that the subtle anatomy has this different lifespan than the physical body. So the physicality and the electromagnetic field die at the end of 95 years or something. If we're really lucky, 120. But they go. And then when they're gone, the life impressions and the skills and the talents that we've honed and developed remain in the subtle anatomy. And it's actually one of the explanations I have for why I have some of this knowledge is that it was in my sacred anatomy and I was able to access that. And I actually teach people to do that. So it's an exciting thing to discover that you know something beyond what you thought you did.
Now, your second principle, I don't know that we're going to get to enumerate each of the 11 principles, but the second one is form follows thought. Let's talk about that.
Right. So thought is not a human specialty. It's not we're not the only place where thought occurs. So every living creature has a form of thought. It's a different kind of thought than human beings, like trees have different thoughts than human beings, but they do have thoughts. And every animal that lives on the earth has thoughts. Yes, they're not maybe rational and logical like human beings feel is so important, but they have their own capacity to have thought. So without thought, there is no form. And what I mean by that is that there is, and actually I can jump down to another principle called extragenesis, interaction of intelligence and frequency, to explain this one. So form follows thought because it must, for one thing. So one of the things that happens is that everything that is essentially an in-breath and an out-breath. So the in-breath that occurs is often before the out-breath of idea. So the in-breath is possibility and potential. The out-breath is manifestation or form. So the in-breath could be thought of as the idea occurring. The out-breath could be thought of as the form manifesting. So it is important to understand that in extragenesis, which means before and above the beginning, a wonderful word that came to me in meditation in about 2002 it's an idea that says there is a space that happens before even we have the thought. So there's extragenesis in everything that happens, and it's an interesting idea because, you know, how we talk about the divine or God breathing in and exhaling, and then there was light, or then there was a life. So if you look at in the Bible, the quotes that people are always making, I can't think of it at the moment, Lori, but it's let there be light. And so before there was let there be light, there had to be the idea of there needs to be light. Light needs to come. So extragenesis is the moment before that thought even arises, and then it stimulates the thought, and then it's the moment before the thought manifests to form. So form follows thought. So thought is the crystallization that needs to happen that brings form into manifest reality. It's basically an idea that exists in the ethers of all that there is, and then we bring it into focus. So this is metaphysical concept, and it's really beyond, in some ways, it's beyond the concept of quantum physics and stuff at this point. So if we look at metaphysical thinking and then quantum physics, they're getting closer and closer and closer every day. But I believe this is a metaphysical thought. So form follows thought is metaphysical. But energy as intelligence is now becoming quantum. So there's you know what I'm saying? There's like this growth curve that we're on.
Well, does it mean, for example, if you're looking at my energy field, that you're able to see that the forms that you see in my energy field are shaped by my thoughts?
Definitely. And also by my thought. So if I'm looking at someone and I'm angry at them, you know, I feel anger or I have an attitude about that person, my attitude can actually shape how they respond and react to me. So my thinking about who they are will influence the form that they respond in. So just like if I'm looking at you and I'm looking at your energy field, which looks very nice, by the way, and I'm looking at your energy field and I'm seeing the swirling, moving energies that are all around you, what I'm looking at too is also, you know, traumas that have occurred, issues, story, events in a life. For example, if you've been in a really bad car accident, that's usually, you know, you can see that usually in the sacred anatomy. It's not particularly damaged, but it shows dents. It shows effects. If someone has been in a war, for example, and this is something we've seen with the wonderful young people coming back from the Middle East now, many of these folks have been really assaulted energetically as well as physically. And it's very difficult when something is happening to you that's really horrible. There's a a terror that goes with it. There's anger that goes with it. And those thoughts shape the way that you react and respond. It's impossible to not be affected by your thinking.
Well, I think the next principle sort of follows on from this. Intelligent light will interact with focused attention. That's sort of another way of saying form follows thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But focused intention is like clear and directed, whereas form follows thought is like more of a universal kind of random event. Intelligent light will interact with focused intention is a clear indicator that I can direct intelligent light at an issue and I can support the issue in shifting because I can direct that light. And, we do that when we turn on a flashlight and shine it up in the sky. We're directing intelligent light with focused intention. We're focused in sending it into the sky. And then when we turn it off, well, the change is still occurring. The light is still moving, even though we've turned it off and stopped it. So intelligent light will interact with focused intention is a principle that states that this is how we shift energy. This is how we move it. So when we're working with subtle energy, we're working with the intelligence of energy, and light, or intelligent light, which is just energy, will react to focused intention. So I'm sort of building on these ideas as I go through these.
Now, I know on Facebook, for example, there are these discussion groups for people who call themselves light workers. And I presume this is really what they're talking about, is the idea of using focused intention to channel light, let's say healing, to other people or beings.
I don't honestly know very much about that, because I'm fairly insulated and I pretty much just do my own work and focus on this. So when I think of light workers, I think of Dr. Gail Pierce, who, taught me how to bring in the rainbow lights. And, she called herself a light worker. And her idea was, or that was one of the things that she called herself, but her idea was that light had profound power and that you could direct it. So if people are doing that, then yeah, sure, that would be the name that could be applied to them. But I haven't really been that exposed to that kind of thing, so
okay.
Sorry.
Well, it's understandable. Now, but the next principle that you've laid out is really interesting to me. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. I'm pretty sure that comes from one of the Buddhist sutras. Isn't that part of the Heart Sutra?
Form is nothingness, nothingness is form, or form is emptiness, emptiness is form. It's been said both ways. And when I was exposed to the Heart Sutra by His Holiness, the thing that struck me the most was that this was an excellent description of what it was that was happening when I worked with subtle energy. And so I added it to the operating principles. In fact, it was one of the last principles that I added. But form is nothingness, nothingness form is directly from the Heart Sutra. And it is one of the premier teachings of this stream of Buddhism that is practiced in Tibet. And it's worldwide. I mean, everyone knows the Heart Sutra. But the way that I explain this is that form, so the form of the sacred anatomy is essentially nothingness. So when we look at consciousness or subtle energy, we're looking at nothingness. So it is empty. It is emptiness. And then the nothingness also is form. So it's one of those things that can kind of, crack your head open. But boom, and you can sit there. I remember hearing it for the first time when His Holiness said it, and I literally felt like my brain was going to crack like an egg. And I think that just sort of allowing the possibility that form is nothingness, nothingness is form, it puts us on a good road for really truly understanding the spiritual potential that the sacred anatomy offers, which is profound. Because if we can understand this form that has happened around our physical body, we can actually understand how to interact with the world in a much more compassionate way. And really what this does, the sacred anatomy really allows us to evolve as beings. We're not limited to the physical potential that we have. We're also the spiritual potential. And so form is nothingness, nothingness is form is right in there as far as I'm concerned as an operating principle.
It seems to suggest that we have to go well beyond our normal logical categories in order to understand what you're dealing with here.
Yes, we really do. We have to step outside of time. We have to step outside of space, and we really have to look at form as this plastic event that has a liberated quality. Truthfully, I remember meeting an extraordinary man when I was very young, in my 20s. His name was the Reverend Harold Plume. And Harold Plume had this exceptional gift. He was able to literally dematerialize his hand and stick it into somebody. And then he'd stand there talking about his grandson or bass fishing while something was happening and people had remarkable miracle healings. So I watched Harold Plume work as much as I could in my 20s because I learned more by watching him work than I did by listening to anybody talk. And what I saw was that he actually created a kind of plasticity in the physicality where he expanded the space between molecules or atoms, and he opened it up and people began to vibrate, and they actually looked like they were kind of disassembling, and Harold Plume would reorganize them, and then they would come back together and he would remove his hand. And that would be it. And he died a few years later after that, way too soon. He was just in his early 70s. But Harold Plume was an extraordinary guy. And I've seen my teachings that I've studied, the people I've studied have been master healers. And I've just watched them work. And that's how I learned the most, But that's form is nothingness, nothingness is form. It can be reshaped, it can be reformatted, we can be rebooted, we can be repaired, and we can be rebuilt. And all of that is knowing that form is nothingness, nothingness is form. And that's what I've learned to do with the subtle anatomy, and it's influenced people's lives dramatically. When I think of the 10,000 plus sessions that I've done over the last 20 years or so, what I am most impacted by is how incredibly flexible people really are. And they think they're in cement, but they're actually not. They're light and wave, and they're sound, and they're moving constantly. And everything is in a spiral. Everything is moving in a spiral form.
The other principle you have is that everything is vibrating.
Yes, everything is vibrating. I mean, that was almost my first one, I think I wrote down, was everything has vibrational frequency, And what I mean by that is literally just that. Everything is vibrating, and it's vibrating at different rates and in different ways. But it's all moving. Everything is moving. Nothing is stagnant. Nothing is still. In fact, stagnation is a pathology. When people are not moving, that's a problem. And that's when you see the incidence of, things like tumors and cysts, is when there's stopped energy. And so when we see that, we immediately work with that. But it's interesting to apply these subtle anatomy principles and operating principles of sacred anatomy, energy medicine, when you apply them to physicality and you say, when something is stagnant or stopped, that's a pathology. Well, yes, it's true. If the lymph is stuck, there's a problem. If the blood isn't flowing, that's a problem. So I think saying that everything has vibrational frequency could also be said everything is healthy when it's moving.
Now, you also bring up what some people call the law of attraction. I think you call it the principle of universal attraction, that like attracts like. Is that the same thing as what is so common in the New Age culture these days, the law of attraction?
I don't know. I tend to think of it a little differently. Maybe I just don't know what they're all saying. But like attracts like means that stagnation attracts stagnation. Liberated energy attracts liberated energy. Anger attracts anger. Love attracts love. So like attracts like means exactly that, and it is a universal attraction. It's universal. I see it in every possible form of life, that like attracts like.
Yeah. Well, of course, there are many different people who teach this. I know there's somebody named Abraham Hicks who has gotten a lot of popularity for that. I have to admit I don't pay a lot of attention to it, but I can say this: I'm very interested in higher consciousness, spirituality, mysticism, intuition, metaphysics, and I find myself surrounded by other people who are. So it seems like there's something to it. I gravitate towards certain people and away from other people, and I think it has to do with my own preferences.
Right. I think so. And I think the idea of like attracts like, or the principle of universal attraction, I think that my primary focus here is in applying this to subtle energy work. So I think when I'm thinking about the principle of universal attraction as it applies to subtle energy work, what we're looking for is how the practitioner interacts with the individual they're working with, the client. And if you are approaching that client as broken, as damaged, and as not okay, there is a like that will come about. There is a way that will show itself. And you'll actually be in a stagnant place. You won't be able to work. So what I suggest to people when I teach is that they approach their clients as manifestations of divine consciousness, as whole, as beautifully manifest, and as complete beings, and that when they see them that way, their own light shines brighter, and they are attracted to each other, and the other parts of that person that are causing difficulties and stresses and anxieties and upsets, those things have less power because you strengthen the light by looking at the person as if that's what they are. So, of course, we know that that's what people are. But if you approach them from that attitude, the like attracts light, and it is powerful.
That sounds like excellent advice. Because now you're talking about, I think you used the word source there, the source of who we are, the very beginning of our consciousness. Each and every one of us has that place of beginning, and that's a very important place. It's something that in our culture we're very far removed from it normally.
Well, I think for me, this is possibly should be a principle too, but the truth about who and what we are is that we are manifestations of pure consciousness, and that at our core, which we've talked about already, but at our core, there is a fragment or a filament of total divine knowingness. So the I am is right there in the center of who and what you are. And then the crossing of the channel creates the I am not and the I am meeting and explodes into an I am with a small I and a small a. And that creates the individuated nature. So we have the totality and the individuation within us. I mean, it's really we could call it the Holy Trinity, the core, the channel, and the edge, or the core, the channel, and the individuated self. So we are really manifestations. This is the work that I do. It was described by the incredible Murray Korngold, who is a great old friend of mine. And Murray said, your work hovers in a tripod between medicine, theology, and science. And he says it's just hovering right there in the center of those three things. And it is a manifest truth that we have these great bodies of knowledge, science, theology, spirituality, the truth of what things are that great minds have worked with and struggled with for eons. But often different disciplines don't speak to each other. And there's a kind of breakdown in that. And I think when we start looking at everything as vibrational frequency, those barriers start to collapse and science and spirituality start to connect.
Now, you have another principle, which is that source wants partnership with individuation. And I know you use the word individuation quite a bit in your work. It's also a word that's used extensively in Jungian psychology. And I wonder if you mean it the same way.
Well, here's how I mean it, and with great thanks to Carl Jung for coining the term. I mean it as the separation from the source. So when we individuate out off of that source frequency at our core, and we begin to then co-create with divine source a structure that we could call the sacred anatomy. That structure is the individuated nature come to form. So it's our soul splitting off from the soul of the great mother or the great father or the great parental unit, however you want to think of it. And that source unit, that source energetic at the middle of who and what we are, can never be broken or damaged or destroyed in any way. But the individuation takes the hits. The individuation experiences the lessons. The individuation wrestles and fights with reality and the pain of life. The individuation suffers and learns and seeks to join in union with the totality. We're constantly, everything about the sacred anatomy is constructed in a way that is driving us back to the core. We are constantly seeking to come home to the core. It's how we form. It's the cosmology between how this structure, forms and what we are doing here and now.
It strikes me that you're probably putting your finger now on the paradox, which is sort of like we're already enlightened, and yet at the same time we work towards getting enlightened.
That's right. That's exactly right. So we're already awake, we're already conscious, and yet we have a bag over our head, And the bag over our head says, I don't know what's going on, but in truth, we totally know what's going on. And all we have to do is just remove the bag over our head, and then we can see that we're divine nature manifest.
That's a great metaphor, and it sort of leads right into your next principle, which is that transformational shifts must be witnessed.
Oh man, that's the real deal. The truth is transformational shift, which is what healing work is. If you're really working with someone to change their life, you're working with them to transform what has been stagnant or stuck or stopped. And you're helping them get movement back into the sacred anatomy. You're helping them move that forward. And so it is critically important that we witness that shift. There must be a witness. And that, in fact, is the role of the channel. The channel witnesses the core, which releases the individuated currents. So the channel's major job is to hold the space of the witness. It's a divine classification, and it's a quality that is imperative in any deep spiritual work, which is what health and healing is. It's deeply spiritual.
The channel, for any of our viewers who don't remember, is a like a beam of energy that's perpendicular to the core.
Right. So it crosses like this. It comes in from the front and goes out the back, and it's located down around your belly button, a little below your belly button. And the channel is made of the same stuff as the core. It's the same exact ingredients, but it has chosen a different function. So we could say that the core is the expressive nature and the channel is the reflective nature. So witnessing is critical. So when you're experiencing release, isn't it imperative that someone witnesses you in some way? Even if the witness is the stars in the sky, isn't it imperative that somehow or another the shift occurs? It's that old adage of, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it really fall? Has it really happened? So this is getting down to the nitty-gritty of the fact that we are consciousness congealed, manifest, and focused. And if we, in fact, want to shift that consciousness, we need the sacred witness to hold us. That's why we have community.
We're all here for each other, largely for that purpose, I suppose. And then I didn't know that we get through all of your principles, but we're getting close to the end already. There's the principle of universal non-attachment.
Oh yeah, this is one of my favorite, because releasing attachment is actually a function of one of the systems. It's the elimination system. So when you think of elimination, you think of, I'll just get rid of waste and debris and excess. But in the sacred anatomy, releasing requires releasing attachment. And so the principle of non-attachment means that when you're no longer attached to something, it automatically wants to leave the structure. It automatically wants to go into the universal, which is like the great soup that we swim in, because it no longer has a reason to be there. When we hold on to waste, inflammation, disease, trauma, when we hold on to it and are constantly renaming it, recategorizing it, putting it in a new box with the ribbon on it, and, making it more and more special. I'm reminded of my precious, it's like we're always doing that with our stuff, whether it be our psychological, melodrama, or it be the enormous amount of crud most people have in their garages, right? Their junk drawer. That stuff is what we're attached to. So if we can look at it and clearly say, I'm not attached, that stuff leaves. It just leaves immediately. It no longer can stay. It finds its way out of your life in some way, shape, or form. But energetically and applied to the sacred anatomy, the principle of non-attachment, universal non-attachment means that the universal pulls the waste, debris, and stuff of excess out of our structure the instant we're no longer attached to it.
And your final principle is the principle of, it looks like, principle of compatible resonance.
Yeah, the structure wants to be whole. The principle of compatible resonance. So the structure seeks to be whole or wants to be whole is, it's actually one of the things that drives medicine, is that the physical body wants to work correctly. It has its own natural intelligence, and naturopathy and osteopathy really look at that very aggressively and apply a lot of that understanding to using vitamins and minerals and a natural movement as a way to heal. But in subtle anatomy, the structure wants to be whole. So the structure is always seeking that which can complete it, that which can make it whole. And compatible resonance is the magnetic attraction that the structure uses to draw to itself that which it needs, and that which it has most of sometimes. So, for example, the more you meditate, the more you want to meditate. The more you eat chocolate, the more chocolate you want to have. So there's a compatible resonance in a frequency that chocolate eaters have to each other. And they congregate around the chocolate on the snack table. And they're talking to each other. And it's a particular kind of resonance.
What does eating chocolate have to do with being whole in a spiritual sense? You lost me there.
Oh, okay. Well, I think chocolate eaters might agree with me that there is a spiritual quality and a sustenance that's gathered and garnered from eating chocolate. And people who are really serious chocolate eaters, and I know a few, they need chocolate to feel whole, to feel like they're getting everything they need from the universe.
Interesting, because I love chocolate. I never thought of it quite in this way.
Well, compatible resonance is interesting. So here's another form of compatible resonance. Let's say that you are a person who is a cheesemaker, and you love to make cheese, and you're surrounded by different cheeses all the time, and you go to cheese shops, and chances are you're going to resonate with other people who love cheese. And your friendships will include people who love cheese. And you'll have more in common in the cheese area with certain people than other people. So that would be compatible resonance in a very basic way, much like the chocolate analogy. But here's another one. What if you're a drama queen and everything in your life is drama, and you're constantly having one disaster after another, constantly in the throes of your terribly stressful life? Who do you attract to yourself? You attract the compatible frequency of other people who are also in that drama of life.
So I would have thought the principle of compatible resonance might have something to do with the way in which I met my wife or you met your husband, that you find another person who really completes your life. They're very different from you, but they make your life whole.
Well, that's exactly right. Of course it applies to that. So falling in love, but also getting sick, It's interesting to see, but oftentimes when one member of a family is sick, you'll find several members of a family who are sick. So there's a frequency, a compatible resonance in that household or that family unit that's causing this sort of family problem. And you really can't treat just the one person. You actually have to look at everybody in the family. So there's compatible resonance between couples, between families, between companies. corporations. I mean, all you have to do is to walk into a place like Apple or Google, and you know that there's a compatible resonance that is not the same as the compatible resonance I have with my students when I'm teaching a workshop. So there's a different frequency that I'm evoking. If I go to the library, the compatible frequency and resonance is for the written word, and people in the library are all in some way resonating to that. So there's all these forms of compatible resonance that hold us together. But there's other ones too that are much more eclectic, and that would be, for example, the resonance of tranquility. So if you have if you're resonant with the energetic of tranquility and you spend 15 hours a week on your meditation cushion and you're finding great tranquility, there is a way that your life begins to reflect that. And the compatible, pets and plants and events and people start to show up. And it isn't the same as like attracts like. It is the compatible resonance, that frequency that other person, place, or thing is holding for you. So the place you choose to go on vacation would reflect that tranquility. The people that you invite to your birthday party would reflect that tranquility. They would also reflect stress and anxiety and upset and pain and trauma. So you can resonate, it's like there's no attachment from the universal. It just says, here's 20 zillion ways you can all relate to each other. Have at it, and then it's up to us to say yes or no to high level frequency, low level frequency, medium level frequency, or whatever frequency we resonate to. It's up to us to say yes or no.
Well, maybe it's this principle of compatible resonance that brought you into the New Thinking Aloud channel.
Oh boy, you better believe it. I'll tell you, because I'm outside the paradigm. I'm outside of the paradigm of the new age. I don't really fit in. I don't really fit in with the old age either. So I'm kind of like, I don't know what, medium age. It's like I'm floating somewhere between everybody. And, this is paradigm shifting thinking. This is new thought. So it's awesome that, you found me and I found you. And that is the compatible resonance. We're both people who are seekers. We're both people who are constantly asking questions. Curiosity is queen in my life. Why is that happening is the first thing that I ask. And so I'm just always in the conversation. And the truth of the matter is I love hearing what other people think, because sometimes they have ideas I haven't thought of. And that's exciting, So that is, I think, also something you like.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Desda, I did notice today from the previous interview, one of our viewers wanted me to ask you a particular question, which is, how is the human energy structure affected by things in the environment, like all these microwaves, radio waves, pollution, chemicals, and so on, industrial waste, everything in the environment? Is that impacting us at the level of the human energy structure?
Yes, it is. And this is the way that it impacts us. It impacts the electromagnetic field profoundly. And the electromagnetic field is the way that we deliver our soul's purpose into the world. It is our voice, our writing, our thinking, and that which is electromagnetic about us that delivers this purposeful action within us. And unfortunately, the electromagnetic field is really being damaged by cell phones, computers, excessive electrical equipment, and also, all this Wi-Fi and 5G and everything that's happening. That it is very damaging to the electromagnetic field. That's why I'm teaching a whole class on that called Solutions to Anxiety, Stress, and EMF toxicity. Because to be honest with you, it is epidemic. It's everywhere. And I even know people who are really crippled by this and literally can't leave their house and kind of live in a, safe space and have to order in, They're really in distress. There are a few towns in the United States where they're not allowing Wi-Fi, and those people flock to those places inevitably. But it damages us. So the question might be, how? What does it look like? So here's what it looks like to me. Probably everybody who's watching this channel has seen a Carillion photograph. Well, on most Carillion photographs, you'll see black spots, black places, spots. Sometimes like the shape of a monitor screen. You'll see it, or you'll see especially around the head where people hold their phone. You'll see a black area. That's what it looks like, except to me, when I look at an electromagnetic field, it's always a little bit bigger than what the Carillion photographs show. And it's a little more interesting than what the Carillion photographs show. They show usually one color or maybe two, but I see often 3, 4, 5 colors in an electromagnetic field. And what happens when people have a lot of electromagnetic debris in that electromagnetic field is that their energy gets more and more toxic over time. It kind of gets duller and duller and duller. So a healthy electromagnetic field looks like an amazing burst of color. It's filled with vibrant shades of light. It's buzzing. It's got all kinds of excitement. It's happy looking. And someone who has been exposed to a lot of toxicity, electromagnetic field toxicity, will have a kind of a grayer, darker blue, kind of duller looking, dull green, dull blue, dull gray, and kind of dirty. They'll look kind of dirty. And then they'll have large dark spots where the electromagnetic energy is truly damaged. So in the late 90s, it started to get really bad with cell phones. That's when people really started using them a lot. And my whole apprentice group came to me, several of them in tears, and said, I just can't walk down the street without feeling like I've been stabbed by a sword. When the electromagnetic frequency for a cell phone would go through someone's structure, it hurt them. And so I started to pray, and it was like 3 months of meditation, prayer, contemplation, and just really begging for help from the divine. It took me that long to really get a solution. And so I learned how to rebuild the electromagnetic field for people. And we haven't done as much science with it as I would like to, but we know how to do this with intelligent light. And it seems to work really well. I personally sat my daughter needed an MRI and she was scared. And I actually sat in the room with the MRI machine with headphones on, but I felt no negative side effects because I was using a shielding that I also got at that time. It was like a gift from God, this shielding that really helped protect me from the energetic explosion that an MRI machine is. So I personally have tested stuff like that. For me, that was a test. And I put my life on the line to test it. And turned out it worked. The shielding that we had developed worked. So I don't wear any gizmos or gadgets. I don't promote them. I don't think you should have particular crystals that protect you. I don't believe in any of that because I believe that energy is intelligent and that electromagnetic energy is intelligent. Electromagnetic energy that's basically an energetic disturbance is intelligent. And so when I feel it coming to me, I ask it to go around, and it does. So it sounds crazy, I know. But the truth is, this has been working for over 20 years.
Well, what a fascinating conversation. Once again, Desda, I really enjoy being with you. And our viewers are commenting on how, on your energy level, people just enjoy your enthusiasm, your bubbly personality. So I'm looking forward to further conversations.
Oh, I love doing this, Jeffrey. This is really fulfilling for me, and thank you so much. And I want to thank each of your viewers for giving me the chance to, explain further my thinking and ideas. And And thank you so much for reading my book and for embracing me the way you have. This is spectacular. Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure for me, Desda. Bye for now.